accept that other people have to make quite terrible sacrifices because of the moral position that you have chosen to hold here.
What are you saying, that I'm imposing my morality or theology on other people who may not share it?
No,
or are
not
you
so
saying
much of that, but because you are constraining, with your general caveats and your view, constrains the supply of organs for people who need them. And we did start talking about having perhaps an opt-out system rather than an opt-in one.
That, and does frankly worry me, that we may get into an area of applying or encouraging an area of ethics, in this case medical ethics, that might constrain the provision of organs to people who need them to lead full and fulfilled lives. But I think what we're aspiring to here is a balance between the giver and the recipient, an ethical balance between those two things.
But at the moment, the recipient is coming off an awful lot worse, aren't they? I mean, there is this dire shortage.
Yes, but if you look at the sort of the obverse of that, the prospect that we might get to a place where we are dealing, if you like, in a kind of free market in human organs, and we have kind of organ farms, if you like, or a lot of bodies on elective ventilation that are being kept for the prospect and potential of their organs, then I think you've turned that equation to which you're referring round the other way. If I could raise a hypothetical, and I don't for a moment mean either that this is a straw man argument or that anybody is seriously considering this, but I think it's a good moral hypothetical. Were we to be in a position where we could develop under laboratory conditions human bodies simply for the harvest of their organs, and people were saying, well, it's all right, we've made sure that they're dead by any terms that we apply, brain stem dead, so they're not like real bodies, they're just there for the organs that they can supply to the living. I think a lot of people are going to feel very queasy about that.
Well, they certainly would, because it's such an impractical example, and once you have to rely on kind of a zombie putative science to get away from the moral responsibility you have in the present,
but I think the morality
that you're not on particularly strong ground.
Well, I think that is a moral area that we should consider. I suggest that people would say, no, there is an integrity to the human body that is absolute, irrespective of developing and farming organs.
So you wouldn't take a transplant yourself?
Oh, I would.
But then the integrity argument doesn't...
I dare say I'll need a liver.
Michael Portillo.
So, you talk about an inherent integrity of the human body, and you've just said that it's absolute. But it clearly isn't, because donations occur and you support them. So,
oh, yes.
So, help me with that. It isn't an inherent integrity of the human body which is absolute at all.
Well, no, it's absolute to the extent that that what we shouldn't be doing is creating the kind of neoliberal free market in human organs that your government in the 1980s did so much to promote as an economy, and in the financial markets led us to places like Lehman Brothers and the disgusting self-interest of people like Stephen Hester and Bob Diamond at Barclays.
You're slightly wandering from the point.
Yes, but what I'm saying is that let's invent a future where we have elective ventilation and have a market in organs. Where would we take that, Michael? Would we take that to sort of national lottery for the lucky one who got the best heart available, or would we have hedge fund managers dealing in organs?
I think your position would be much easier if you really did believe in the inherent integrity of the human body, which was absolute, because then you'd have a place that you could rest. But actually, that's not where you are at all. Organs have been taken. You're in support of it. Now, at the moment, we're discussing two possibilities. One is that we should shift the consent from people opting in to people opting out. Now, I think your view is that, the altruistic thing of making a gift is very, very important and would be destroyed by such a system. But is that really so? Can't we arrange this so that it's a perfectly well-informed decision, but we simply up the supply of organs?
I think, Michael, what we want is a balance between the interests of the donor and the interests of the recipient. Obviously, what I'm saying is that there is an absolute integrity to the human body. When that life is finished and nearly over, I mean nearly over, frankly. I mean, in discussion with family and so on, it may be that the greatest gift of that life to the next generation or to a dying person may be an organ under those circumstances. But we need to match donor and recipient as a market rather than having a general market in commodities in human organs. If we're commoditised...
May I ask you a tiny question, maybe a yes or no answer? You've just raised the point about a life nearly over, so that sounds as if you're not necessarily against, what's it called?
Harvesting?
Elective
ventilation. Oh, no, and I think elective ventilation occurs now, doesn't it? I mean, because in a sense, I may have got the terminology wrong, but I believe that families are told that we are ventilating your loved one's body so to give you time to say goodbye and to make this a comfortable process. What I think is that I think there's a huge medical ethical chasm between that and saying, well, we can electively ventilate these and we've got 20,000 bodies now in warm storage, because I don't think there'd be fridges, would they, to harvest things. And I think that there's a moral distinction to be made between those two things.
George Pitcher, thanks very much indeed. Can I just start with George Pitcher mentioned it, but also Henry Kimball, our first witness, who had 2 kidney transplants. He was himself concerned about elective ventilation, but I mean his basic thing was that the interests of the potential recipient and that of the donor should be equal. Is that what's happening at the moment, Melanie?
Well, I think Mr. Kimball was a little confused on this particular point, because he seemed to be saying, on the one hand, he thought that, people should be ventilated in order to give their organs, but on the other hand, he didn't want their interests to be overridden by his own. I mean, and the question is, if the person is not dead but dying, where does he stand on that? And I don't think we got to the bottom of that. But this question of rival interests, I mean, I have to say, I find the arguments that advanced by Anne and Michael during this discussion very chilling, because they seem to be advancing the point that fairness, justice, social justice requires one to instrumentalize other people and to view them as sources of body parts, that one has a duty to...
It doesn't. I mean, it requires you to think about what your moral duty is, and I presume that you would do that as a moral person anyway. But if you have a system which is clearly not working, and it also has this underpinning that many more people would like to do something about it, but the system simply does not work, then it is a perfectly moral way to go. It is not chilling. If anything, it is the more humane response to what you say.
Well, I think it's a
genuine moral dilemma.
There are other moral dilemmas involved here, because in fact when you say we have a system that patently isn't working, people aren't doing what they want to do really, that's obviously the whole thesis behind nudge, is that it happens, and this is the example used by the nudgers. And what they actually do is they say, we are prepared to manipulate, undermine, play around with people's personal autonomy and choice, because after all, they're all a bit irrational. They're not doing what they want to do. They're too lazy and so on. Yes, but why change it? What I'm saying is the onus should be on you to persuade, and I've made that point. But I think that there is a serious danger here of just simply saying, oh, well, everybody wants to do this, don't they? They just don't do it now for some reason, and avoiding the fact that you haven't persuaded them to do it.
I began the programme by being rather shocked, actually, by the idea of elective ventilation. But I thought one of the things that came out of the debate was that both Joyce Robbins and George Pitcher actually didn't rule it out altogether at all. They both thought that it might be something that they would allow.
But Michael, Joyce Robbins, the second witness from the Patients Association, was very much patient care. Was very much against this idea of opting out. She said that made the idea of informed consent, in this case, a lie. She was very strong on that. Yeah. What did you feel about that, Michael?
I don't think it makes it a lie. I think it obviously moves the boundary. It is quite different from what we have at the moment. I think a lot of it depends on how you do it. I propose that it would need to be done in a blaze of publicity, and you would need to give people lots of opportunity to opt out. The reason why, in the end, I don't find it an extraordinarily difficult moral position is that I go back to the very fundamental point that organs are not any use to us after death. But if there are people who believe that they are, who believe in, I don't know, the resurrection of the body or whatever, then by all means let them withdraw
no,
their
but
consent.
it's not a question of the organs being of use to someone after death. Of course, that is not the case. It's a question of what it does to us as people who have such a brutalized view of humanity, that we have no intrinsic respect for human life, that we actually are prepared to take organs from people who are in the process of dying. Because I come back to this point, there is great controversy over.
Well, that's a separate point. But elective ventilation, and I thought, by the way,
elective ventilation is keeping someone alive, not in their own interests. You are then instrumentalizing that person. You are doing a medical procedure to that person, not in that person's interest. That goes against every single medical ethic.
It completely changes our attitude to life and death and how we intervene in relation to
Michael?
Well, first of all, as George Pitcher pointed out at the end, the process of keeping bodily functions going and keeping organs going in people is something which happens today. And as Joyce Robbins said, it is something where, if the family has consented, it may be exactly the right thing to do. What I thought the panel didn't really rise to was Janet Radcliffe-Richards' very interesting attempts to get us focused on the moral question of what is death, and the possibility that our moral view of what death is changes over time.
How important did you think that was?
I thought philosophically that was very important, and I think possibly the reason that we didn't rise to it is because it is extremely complex, and it is shifting, and it is on that borderline of philosophy and technology, and that was why it is particularly troubling. And I thought she was a good witness because she was being very frank about that. But we also therefore have to understand that these definitions are changing all the time. That's why I strongly disagree with Melanie on the point about instrumentalising, which I know is an emotive one, but I don't think in this case is particularly well grounded, because the definition of death is changing all the time. So is the definition of dying and the relationship of consciousness and dying.
I think you have to be very careful that you don't allow the imaginary gains of medical science to be what says is what's driving the changing definition of death and life. I think that actually there's a more profound disillusion and undervaluing of life that we see in everything from the assisted dying debate to a kind of cavalier attitude to human beings. And you could see the kind of, well, what's the value of being alive if you're not morally a person there? That's what she said. I will define death and life differently, philosophically.
She did use consciousness.
This is ridiculous. Life is life, death is death. Death is being redefined solely for the purposes of transplantation. And Janet Radcliffe-Richards, it doesn't really matter what is death, because she would kill people when they're alive.
On that slightly unfair note, I think, I have to bring this to a close. That's it for this week. Remember, The Moral Maze is being podcast. The details are on the Radio 4 website. But from our panel, Melanie